Another awesome matchup on Sunday. 1 o'clock game, Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. Your undefeated Vikings also coming off a bye. They're 5-0. Lions are 4-1 now, I believe. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, can we get the records on the graphic? Can we fit records on there?
Steve needs help now.
I don't have the standings
they are 4-1.
directly.
They're 4-1.
They are.
They're 4-1. Let's go.
Love this matchup. Lions and Vikings. Brian Flores against Ben Johnson. Jared Goff against Flores and the Vikings defense. I have some numbers on those in a minute too, but discuss.
Yeah, I mean, really excited. This is one where both sides of the ball are absolutely fascinating. I mean, genuinely, this is one of the matchups of the season, and we get to see it twice this year.
I love it. Love it so much.
Each side of the ball is amazing. Like, you can argue this is the best coached game we're going to see ever, or not ever, this season, you know what I mean? And we're going to see it twice, as I said. So, on the one,
You're telling me
one side of the
Belichick
ball,
versus Urban Meyer a couple years ago wasn't the one?
On one side of the ball, you've got Brian Flores and this defense that is absolutely wrecking people this year. And he's going up against Ben Johnson, who's arguably the sort of finest coordinator mind who's not yet a head coach in the NFL. So that's phenomenal. And on the other side, you've got Kevin O'Connell and this like miracle he's working with Sam Darnold on offense, and they're going up against this Lions defense, which is all of a sudden a question mark because their best player just got taken out with a broken leg. I am wildly fascinated by what the first part of that is going to be, this Ben Johnson versus Brian Flores thing. We've gone through this season, like all the offenses, in particular, the Shanahan derivatives that Brian Flores has been destroying over the last couple of years since he's been in Minnesota. Obviously, they played twice last year, the Detroit, Minnesota. Both times, Detroit was the team that found the antidote or seemed to be able to completely neutralize this defense, but they faced each other in Week 16 and Week 18 last year, right? So 2 games right at the end of the season. In those 2 games, the Lions offense put up 403 and 381 yards. They had 22 possessions across those 2 games, which resulted in 7 touchdowns and 1 field goal. So this offense was able to diagnose what was happening with that defense, but it was at the end of the year, whereas the other teams that we're talking about faced this team much earlier. So how much of that was Ben Johnson has the keys, and how much of that was they had 15 weeks of tape that nobody else had?
And to be clear, I think last year's Flores defense isn't like this year's
right. Well,
Flores
it's certainly not as good. You know, yeah. I mean, he was making a lot
But even like stylistically, he's doing different stuff this year than he did last
right.
year.
But a lot of similar things. It's just that, again, we referred to it last year as the miracles he was working with smoke and mirrors, right?
Yeah.
And there's only so long you can do that before teams start to figure out the plan, right? But that changes when you have players that can win in given situations. And they have much better players in several spots this year relative to a year ago.
Here's the other stat I wanted to add to that, because you're talking about how much total yards for the Lions and scoring, and it was all very impressive from Detroit. Jared Goff in particular, when he blitzed, and we talked about this in the previews and the review shows last year, they blitzed him like crazy, because that's what Brian Flores does. Right. 55 times they blitzed Jared Goff. He went 43 for 55. Imagine this as a game line.
Right.
43 for 55 for 493, 3 touchdowns, no picks, a passer rating of 122.2. The other key number, 0 sacks.
That's the huge one.
Right? You didn't even, give up these big plays in exchange for 5 or 6 sacks. So for whatever reason, after the smoke and mirrors, all last season, other teams had some issues against this Vikings defense, and Detroit didn't. Mm-hmm. The narrative you're bringing up is interesting. Like, they had the whole season to see it. Does that matter? Because this year's Vikings defense looks better. It hasn't faltered yet, really, other than garbage time against the Packers, basically, when it was in a blowout.
Yeah.
They've made everybody look bad. The other thing that Minnesota is doing really well this year is stopping the run. They're doing it with run blitzes effectively, lowest EPA per play allowed on run blitzes per PFF, and they've just done a much better job making teams one-dimensional as well, and that's where the Lions like to shine, right? The Lions balance on offense where they can power run, they can run outside, they can run play action off it. They have yak guys, they have deep threats. Can Minnesota take a couple of those away? And I think that's how you slow this Lions offense. You got to take a couple of those away, make them a little bit more one-dimensional, whatever that dimension might be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be really interested to see if if facing the Lions earlier in the season, excuse me, has an effect relative to last year, where they had 15 weeks worth of tape on this Flores defense. This year it's been absolutely destroying very good teams, very good quarterbacks, and even like the most impressive thing, I think, I can sort of live with the idea that there's a certain schematic matchup or advantage that Flores has versus Shanahan systems. But when he then made Aaron Rodgers look clueless, a guy that's seen everything in the last 18 years or whatever of play, and he was confused the same way young quarterbacks have been confused as well. That suggests to me that this defense right now is cooking in a way that they're not just going to run into a team that has the answers to everything they're doing, at least not now. Maybe it'll happen in week 15, 16, 17 again. But right now, I think this is a defense to be reckoned with.
The whole Flores thing is just so interesting, because the other part of this was when he came out of New England was playing about 50% man coverage back in like 17, 18, 19. Flores leaves New England, goes to Miami, carries over the same scheme. It didn't work early, but eventually it clicked, right? But it was still like one of the most man-heavy schemes in the NFL. They're playing less man than any other team in the league. Like, Flores has completely changed stylistically, and then it's almost like every team has that disguise package, right? We all mug the A gaps and we do sim pressures and stuff. He's just like put all those pages at the front of the playbook over the last couple of years and said, this is what we're going to live in. This is what we're going to emphasize. If you could figure it out, great, but we're just going to cause enough confusion, hopefully, that you're going to miss those key throws, miss a few plays here and there on 3rd and long that'll give us opportunities to, get off the field.
It's also amazing like how fast things change in the NFL, where we're like a couple of years removed, maybe even 1 year removed from like Vic Fangio's defense being the cutting edge of defense, right? This is what we're trying to get to, this propensity for too high and, relatively consistent looks, right?
Right.
But just executed really well, versus Brian Flores, whose entire defense is characterized by chaotic looks, sort of almost resembles a Rex Ryan defense more than anything else, the way they just mix everything up and you never know who's coming in from where. And it's absolute like controlled chaos from a defensive point of view. They couldn't be much further apart from a schematic sort of philosophical point of view, right? And yet Brian Flores right now, you would argue that's the cutting edge defense in today's NFL. Meanwhile, the sort of Fangio defenses are struggling a little bit more than they have in the last couple of years.
But it's similar to the Ravens scheme. There's some similarities to it. Not as it's the Ravens, the Chargers.
The Ravens scheme? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like the Mike McDonald stuff, right? That's going around the league. There's the similarities there are sim pressures and, havoc around the line of scrimmage and confusion, but also keeping a cap on the top of the defense,
both those schemes
right?
have sort of like in the space of a year, basically, we've pivoted away from, it's like the meme, the guy walking hand in hand with the girlfriend, and then, ooh, look, like Flores is over here. And Vic Fangio was the girlfriend in walking
the NFL,
hand in hand. Yeah, in the space of like a year.
One last old school thing to remember here. Jared Goff against the old the zero blitz. That was Flores was there in 2018 when Goff didn't handle that all-out blitz very well in the Super Bowl. It happened when the Rams played the Dolphins and Flores. The Vikings still like to send the house, right?
Yeah.
More than most. Again, so they've got that whole variety, and it'll be interesting. Like could come down to one of those very specific plays, right? When Flores sends the house, how does Goff handle that? Again, last year handled it great to the tune of almost 500 passing yards. Think about that, 500 passing yards across 2 games against the blitz alone. But there's also this history of Flores getting him, and so my high-level thoughts on this game. Which QB takes care of the ball, Sam? Because Goff had his turnover issues earlier in the year. He's played really clean ball the last few weeks. Sam Darnold, he's thrown like the key interception in certain games that the Vikings have overcome. And overall, I think he's played pretty well. But like, which QB takes care of the ball in this one?
Yeah, and also, so that side of the ball. Number one, does the Lions' defense kind of just fall apart without Aiden Hutchinson? I mean, it's impossible to overstate the impact he's been having on their defense so far this season with just the volume of pressure he was getting. Now, again, you have to add the context of he literally hadn't faced a real offensive tackle yet. I mean, Terrence Steele was the first quote-unquote real offensive tackle he's faced in terms of a starter, And he's not even close to the player he was before he was injured. I mean, he is a substandard starter now as opposed to a decent one. So Aiden Hutchinson racked up 45 pressures in 5 games going up against backups, and the teams were trying to stop that happening, right? Like, they knew, Aiden Hutchinson against Stone Forsythe is a matchup problem. Let's make sure that doesn't kill the game. And it was still wrecking shop, right?
Still a problem.
Yeah. So that's double impact. Number one, he's getting 10 pressures a game going up against that backup with all the chip help and the protection sliding his way, et cetera, et cetera. But also, he's making that happen. Like, he's ensuring that chip help is coming in his direction and they are sliding in his direction, which is opening up things for other people. Now, both those things are gone. He's no longer generating 10 pressures a game because he's on the sideline with a broken leg. And teams have the freedom to no longer have to slide a back or a tight end or the protection that way every single play. So that has, I think, a double negative effect on this defense, which will be interesting to monitor. And then, of course, the other aspect is Sam Darnold for 2 weeks in a row now has taken a slight step back relative to the early season, amazing play. The first one didn't really show up in terms of stats. The second one did a bit. Is that a trend or just a bad couple of weeks? Bad, relatively, what I mean?
I think he had Jets pass defense makes life a little bit difficult. I think he just, against Green Bay, put the ball in harm's way a couple times, but still made some huge throws.
Yeah.
So, Darnold's development here. And the other thing about the Lions is they're playing a lot of man coverage this year, too.
Yep.
And that leads to, can they cover Justin Jefferson without grabbing him, without holding him? There was a lot of penalties. The Jets had a lot of penalties in that game, too, that didn't show up in Darnold's stat sheet. Mm-hmm. And, the Lions have been kind of grabby in the secondary because they're playing a lot of man. So that's, something to keep an eye on as well. One other thing I just want to shout out here in the Goff discussion before we make our picks, the 33rd team, if you go at the 33rd team FB on X, follow them, of course, because we are powered. We are the 33rd team here. Jared Goff numbers against the blitz this year. 73% completions is 5th. 0.56 EPA per dropback is first, 13.9 yards per attempt is first, and a 137.5 passer rating is second in the NFL. So Jared Goff and the Lions, all of those, some team-centric stats there, unbelievable so far this year, and going up against the blitz-heavy Flores scheme. So can't wait to watch that. 1 o'clock on Sunday. The Vikings are favored by 1.5 here.
Okay. I'm going to take the Detroit Lions. And I'm not going to lie, it's a pretty significant emotional hedge.
Yeah. I'm using emotions here because I'm sick of the Vikings fans coming back and be like, you picked against my team again. You picked against my team.
It's not emotions. You just caved to peer pressure is what you're saying.
Again, you know me. I caved to the Lions social media team that one time.
Yeah.
Because they called me out in an old takes exposed video.
Right.
I don't like that. I don't want that to happen.
No, you're apparently very susceptible to peer pressure.
I like Detroit's like the best team to watch, right? But Minnesota's close. Detroit's got all the players that I love, and we love the way they play, and they bite ankles, and they get after it. But Minnesota is going to win and cover. They're going to miss Hutch.
Okay.
Because I'm sick of the Vikings fans.
Because you're sick of Vikings
I have enjoyed watching your team this year. We just bring, normal down-the-middle analysis here. Harry's taking the Vikings as well here. 50.5 over-under. They think it's going to get wild. In Minnesota. It's going to get wild.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.